Now that we have our data in JSON format, we're ready to write it to a file. However, in Windows 8, writing to a file is not quite as simple as it was in previous versions of Windows, where you could write to any file at any time. Writing to a file in Windows 8 requires a little bit of special permission, as Windows 8 is a much more locked down system. First of all, we're going to write to a known location, in this case, the My Documents folder. Even so, we'll need to set permissions in the Capabilities tab of AppX Manifest, and we'll need to set the file associations as well. Let's take a look at what's involved in doing all of that and writing a file that contains our JSON data. To explore what it takes to write our JSON to a file, let's return to our Conference Buddy application. Open that up. And here is, once again, where we are adding the current contact to our collection and then converting it to JSON. It's at this point that we want to write it to a file. To do this, we need to do a little bit of preliminary work. We want to come down to the package app manifest, open that up and go to the capabilities section, and we're going to click Documents Library. Documents Library is going to allow us to write to the My Documents folder. However, notice that the capabilities immediately got a red X, and that's because there's a bit more we need to do. Let's go to the Declarations tab. The first thing that we have to do in the Declarations tab is add a file type association. We're going to give that file type association a name. JSON files. That was the display name. Let's come down and give it the name JSON. Make sure that we check Open is Safe. And then we want to come down to the supported file type and say that the content type for this file is text/plain, and the file type is .json. When we move off of that field, the red X goes away as it does on the Capabilities tab. We are now ready to write .json files. We'd like to factor out a fair amount of the common code of opening and writing to and reading from files, as we'll be doing that from a number of pages. Therefore, we're going to go to the View Models folder and add a new class, and that class will be called File Service. We could put this in the view model for main view model, but then as we add other view models, we would just have to replicate it. The very first thing that we need in our new class is an instance of storage folder. Let's add the using statement for storage folder, which is windows.storage, and we're calling our storage folder underbar current folder. We'll create a public helper method which will set the current folder to the documents library. We'll call that method load documents library, and what it does is it sets current folder to the documents library of the known folders enumeration. If we take documents library out and hit the dot, you can see that we have other known locations as well, such as pictures library, music library, removable devices, and so forth. We're choosing documents library. We're going to start by writing our JSON to a file. So we'll create a public helper method, write to file, that will take a string of JSON and a folder name and a file name. Notice that I've marked this async and that we're using the task keyword. All of this work will be done asynchronously, and we'll be discussing asynchronous programming in an upcoming module. Anything that takes more than 50 milliseconds must be done asynchronously in Windows 8, so asynchronous programming has become very much the norm. Since this would normally return void, we're having it return a task as it's an asynchronous method. The first thing we'll do in our new method is to create a string called contents and set that equal to the JSON that's passed in. The next thing that we will do is call our load documents library method, which will set up the known folders documents library for us. Next, we're going to call an asynchronous method that we will write called createFile, passing in the folder name and the file name and getting back a storage file. Our createFile method has to also be marked async, and it's going to return a task of storage file, which is the norm for asynchronous to return a task of whatever type you would have returned had it not been asynchronous. Let's pause in creating write to file and create the createFile method that we're calling. You can see that createFile is fairly straightforward. It takes a folder name and a file name. It checks to make sure that current folder is not null. And assuming current folder is not null, it obtains a folder by calling createFolder async on the current folder, passing in the subfolder name, and using the collision option open if exists. We then use that folder we got back to call createFile async, passing in our file name, and using the collision option this time, replace existing. We need to cast that, so we use as task, and that allows us to return a task of storage file, and that's what comes back here from our call to create file. Notice that we might return null, so we're going to test for that. If the file is not null, then we are going to call await on file IO append text async, which is part of the file system. We pass it the file that we just created and the contents, which are in fact the JSON. As you can see here, the string is contents is the JSON we were given, and that will write that JSON to a file. If we're not able to do that, we will pop up a message dialog, so let's add the using statement for Windows UI pop-ups that says we're unable to create the file. With this class, which amounts to a service class, available to us, we can return to main view model right after we serialize to JSON, and we can call our file service write to file method. Now we're going to call that with the await keyword because it's an asynchronous method. And now you see why write to file is an asynchronous static method. We're going to pass in our JSON string. We're going to pass in the name of the folder that we wanted to either open or create. And we're going to pass in the name of the file we want to create. Now this will be the file for a given event, but since we haven't created the events yet, we'll just call this test event.json. Let's go ahead and run the application. And we'll scroll over and fill in some of the fields. With those filled in, we'll come over and make a short note. And we will say that I am interested in the raffle. I would like information on dev tools. And we'll pick a few items at random for the products that I'm currently using and the products that I'm interested in. And let's go ahead and right-click and say Save This. Now we know that the JSON has been created. It's in that next line where we write that to the file. Since we're on the line after that, we know this has been written to the file. So let's open up the file system. Go to My Documents. There's Conference Buddy Test, the folder we created. There's testevent.json, the file we created. We can double click on that and that will bring up Notepad, and you can see that our JSON has been successfully written to that file. Our next step is to be able to read the JSON back into the program and convert it from JSON back into objects.